The United States and Iran are heading into their second round of talks, even as the second U.S. aircraft carrier speeds toward the region, with the threat of a military strike still very much looming. Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed his doubts that a good deal with Iran can be reached. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio conceded that it was complicated to deal with the Ayatollah's regime. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
U.S. envoys Witkoff and Kushner, as well as Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, are heading to Geneva for this second round of talks hosted by Oman. Iran says the talks are limited to the nuclear issue, while the U.S. has additional demands and says there's a one-month deadline. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio conceded it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to reach a deal with the Ayatollah's regime.
Okay, we're dealing with people who make geopolitical decisions on the basis of pure theology, and it's a complicated thing. I mean, no one's ever been able to do a successful deal with Iran, but we're going to try. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will be traveling. I think they're traveling right now to have important meetings, and we'll see how that turns out.
Prime Minister Netanyahu says he's skeptical that any deal can be reached, and Iran cannot be trusted. Netanyahu told the Conference of Presidents Leadership Mission that Trump believed that Iran will not miss the opportunity to reach a deal after learning the lessons of last year's 12-day June war.
I will not hide from you that I express my skepticism of any deal with Iran because, frankly, Iran is reliable on one thing. They lie and they cheat. But I said that if a deal is to be reached, it should have several components that we believe are important not only for the security of Israel, but for the security of the world. There shall be no enrichment capability, not stopping the enrichment process, but dismantle the equipment and the infrastructure that allows you to enrich in the first place.
Meanwhile, anti-regime dissent is continuing from the homes of a growing number of Iranians. Reports from Tehran say residents are chanting slogans against the country's clerical leadership from their balconies and windows. While mass demonstrations have largely subsided, residents of many cities in Iran have recently resumed voicing their opposition from their homes, a tactic seen as lower risk amid continued security pressure. Millions of desperate Iranians are still waiting for President Trump to fulfill his promise that help was on the way.
And joining us now with more on Iran is Behnam Ben Taleb, Senior Director of the Iran Program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So the Trump administration is insisting on continuing negotiations with the Ayatollah regime. And what kind of remains unclear, there's many conflicting reports, that the negotiations, are they solely focusing on the nuclear issue, or are they also addressing the ballistic missile and regional proxy threat?
Well, even if they did focus solely on the nuclear issue, it would be a mistake to ignore the missile threat, because ballistic missiles can indeed carry weapons of mass destruction like nuclear weapons. So there's an incentive to certainly nest that issue into the larger nuclear complex, if you will. The challenge is the Trump administration, in particular President Trump, has been saying multiple things about what a deal does and does not include in the scope of their negotiations. And I guess right now their goal is to make sure that American allies and American adversaries have to keep hedging to figure out the exact parameters of the nuclear talks.
Mm-hmm. And now President Trump also stated that Operation Midnight Hammer back in June completely destroyed Iran's nuclear program. So if that is the case, I mean, what is there to discuss now regarding the nuclear program? I mean, what threat does the regime pose on this issue today?
Well, what the Operation Midnight Hammer destroyed, and make no mistake, it did destroy 3 major nuclear facilities. It earned a pause. It earned a stop in enrichment in Iran, which we had not seen since April 2006. So that's why it was both historic and impactful. But what the operation took away was the regime's enrichment capacity, meaning how much enrichment it could do at a certain period of time, because it targeted 2 enrichment facilities and 1 larger nuclear complex. but it did not remove entirely Iran's enrichment capability. That enrichment capability is what was actually targeted by the Israelis for the other portion of the 12-day war, to include centrifuge production plants, to include nuclear scientists, to including other nuclear research centers, and things of the like. But there still is a lingering capability there, whether you're looking at technical know-how, other facilities, or personnel.
And Israeli and even U.S. officials, we've heard, are expressing skepticism about reaching a deal, a nuclear deal or any other kind of deal. And so even if a deal is reached, can the U.S. trust that the regime will even uphold their end of the deal? Because we know in the past they've lied, they've misled the international community, they've misled atomic inspectors. So can they even be trusted to uphold the deal?
In short, no, but that's, in my view, not even the main reason to have qualms with the deal or with any deal at this moment in time. Because I believe there is no nuclear off-ramp, there is no diplomatic off-ramp to the crisis that has forced this conversation right now. And that crisis missing from the conversation about talks that are slated to be held in Geneva tomorrow is that they are going to be on the back end of the worst repression, the worst mass killing from the state against the street in the 47-year history of the Islamic Republic, and also in the past century and a half of contemporary Iranian history. When we're looking at that small window of time in January between when 36 to 43,000 protesters were killed by this regime, President Trump not once, not twice, but multiple times offered assistance to the Iranians, said that he would hold those who engaged in the crackdown responsible, and even said that help was on the way. And that's why right now nuclear talks can indeed be disheartening. And one, in my view, medium-term reason that the administration and that the Iranians are actually engaging with the administration is to actually create this impression of the loss of American support in the psyche of Iranian dissidents and in the psyche of Iranian protesters who are banking on that Western assistance. So you're right. Not only is there no trust, and not only is the Islamic Republic keen to run the clock past the Trump administration and say we lived past max pressure 2.0 like we did max pressure 1.0, but right now, again, there is no moral, political, strategic case for that engagement. But make no mistake, President Trump is as much negotiator-in-chief as he is commander-in-chief, so he's looking to exhaust all options before going back to the use of force.
And it's interesting that you brought that up. That was actually going to be my next question, really, is how can the Trump administration or President Trump reconcile sort of those tweets, you know, help is on the way, urging Iranians to take to the street, you know, and then seeing the Iranian regime cross his red line and yet still go into sort of the diplomacy option. I mean, how does he reconcile that? And should they reach a deal, I mean, what you know, will happen to the Iranian people?
Well, it's critical that he does reconcile that for three reasons, in my view. One, political, is that the Trump administration, both in term one and term two, has tried to draw a very sharp contrast to its Democratic predecessor. Just look at the Obama administration, for example. President Trump drew a sharp contrast with Obama in 2009, who didn't support Iran's Green Movement protests and preference nuclear diplomacy. And instead, in President Trump's first term, he issued strong rhetorical and political support multiple times for Iranian protesters. So, you know, he has a political interest to keep drawing that sharp contrast rather than create a comparison. Next, of course, is strategic. After actually the Obama administration failed to enforce its own red line in Syria in 2013, you may remember, in 2014, the Russians invaded Crimea. And similarly, every time the U.S. looks weak abroad, it actually invites more kind of chaos and mayhem at, you know, the global stage. 2021, the U.S. left Afghanistan in a very disastrous way, as you may remember. Months later, the U.S. failed to deter Putin from invading Ukraine again in early 2022 for strategic reasons. The president has an incentive to uphold his red lines, and also for moral reasons, to course correct, get to the heart of what you mentioned. He promised support to the most pro-American and to the most pro-Israeli population in the heartland of the Muslim Middle East. Those things are hard to find in that part of the world. That's a card that ought not to be burned. President Trump is remarkably popular in Iran because of him breaking all the taboos in his first term. It'd be a shame to lose that political capital and vindicate the talking points of some of the most anti-American folks in that part of the world.
So certainly critical days ahead. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.